the BirdGuides Podcast.
Welcome to the BirdGuides Podcast with me, Josh Jones.
And me, David Campbell.
How's things, David? You all right?
Yeah, really well. Been enjoying a bit more migration the last few days. Don't know if it's been busier around your local area.
Pretty steady, really. I think it's a pretty quiet week, but there was a bit of weather over the weekend which seemed to get things going a little bit, but still fairly quiet my end. Why? What have you been seeing?
Well, I've had a few passerines starting to move through. So in the last week, I've had grasshopper warbler. That was the most satisfying. Kicked one up from just inadvertently from the edge of a field.
Oh, cool.
Showed beautifully in the brambles. I've had redstart, a few willow warblers, fly over siskin, house martins and swifts on the move. And at my local wetlands has been a pair of ruddy shellbacks, a peck sands dropped in, wood sand, that kind of thing.
Peck sand?
Yeah, not my find, unfortunately. But
Oh, okay.
and not even a patch tick, but still rather nice. Yeah.
You're very nice, I'd say.
Yeah, and little ring plovers have got late broods, some really cute little chicks I've been looking at. So yeah, it's been pretty busy.
And it's not even August.
Exactly. Yeah, it really does begin in the latter end of July, doesn't it? All this stuff.
It's amazing. I actually have had a tick since we last spoke, can you believe?
What, a baston tick?
No, a full fat tick, David.
What? Oh, have you?
Yeah, I have, yeah. It's not a bird. It's a dragonfly, southern migrant hawker.
Oh, wow, that was new for you, was it? Wow.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. We haven't profited from the recent expansion until this year, but just seems like this is the year for them. It seems like a big year around the country, and several sites all of a sudden seem to have become occupied by them this summer around here. There's quite a few sites around Petrel that have had them, so I went out looking at likely looking spots during the warmth at the end of last week, and the squacco heron spot in Crowland where we had the squacco earlier this summer. Lovely little reedy pond, quite sheltered and a bit of a sun trap, and pretty much instantly had one hawking up and down there, so that was really nice. And it seems like a good year for dragonflies.
Yeah, well, we were enjoying Lesser Emperor when we were up visiting you last time, so it's been pretty busy up there.
Yeah, they seem to be well established here now. But anyway, just the two of us today. Ian is away. He's on holiday in Sweden. I suspect he's likely watching the first migrant pied flycatchers, probably Caspian terns flying overhead and enjoying a nice cold beer in the Swedish summer sunshine. So just the two of us here.
Yeah, I'm rather envious of Ian. I often go to Finland in July, but I've skipped it this time. So wish I could be out in Fennoscandia along with him. But I hope he's having a good time.
Yeah, and we're starting today's pod with a little bit of sad news which has come out this morning while we were prepping to record, and that's that Bill Oddie has passed away at the age of 85. Bill is, of course, an absolute icon of British birding, and many would say perhaps the most famous British birdwatcher of all time. Certainly, I think a lot of people would say that, although it was something that seemed to make him a little bit uncomfortable when it was presented as such. He was undoubtedly a modest and quite shy chap, but an absolute icon of the scene.
Yeah, I mean, he was just a legend. He was a significant part of why I got into birding, as I'm sure is the case for many, many people. I remember meeting him at the bird fair. I only met him once. I know when you were editor of the magazine, you spoke to him quite a lot, but I only had the pleasure of meeting him once, and he signed a hat for me at bird fair, and I always remembered that fondly. And I just really admired how he was always very outspoken for wildlife. He didn't really mince his words. He didn't hesitate. He said what needed to be said about conservation.
Yeah, definitely. A huge character, that there is no doubt. And I think it's fair to say probably that he did more to popularise birding than anyone during the 90s and early 2000s. Made birding mainstream in many respects. Primetime BBC television shows, Birding with Bill Oddie, and then Bill Oddie Goes Wild after that as well. I remember I was very much of an impressionable age back then, and I think it's fair to say that Bill was definitely a big part in inspiring me and giving me the bug for birding, not just birding really, for all wildlife.
But he did make it fun. He did make it seem fun, which it is.
Absolutely. I always remember that one episode in Bill Oddie Goes Wild. Do you remember when he was running around on that Dorset Heath with
the
white
handkerchiefs?
hankies? Trying to attract the nightjar in.
That has really like permeated into popular culture. I think a lot of people who aren't even birders know that. If you mention nightjars, they'll say, "Oh, you're waving your hankies around like Bill Oddie."
Have you ever done that?
I've tried it in the past. I've not personally had a huge amount of success with it, but I know people who swear by it as a method of getting good views.
No, I remember doing it at Dersingham Bog. It worked there.
I did it. Oh, nice.
Yeah, many years ago when I was a teenager. But yeah, got Bill to thank for that.
Back when I was a kiddie birder, and I, idolised Bill initially, because he was the first famous birder I knew of. I somehow got hold of an old DVD collection for goodies and watched them all, and really enjoyed it. And I even loaded it was the first music I ever bought while I was still learning what music I liked. I downloaded the best of the goodies on my PSP back when I was like 9 or 10. So that was the first album I bought. Yeah,
iconic. Of course, he was the face of Springwatch when it first came on the scene in 2005 as well. He's just, as I said, he's like one of the most, if not the most prominent British birder, that's for sure. And of course, has done so much more besides birds. But I think birds were really his main lifelong passion, I think it's fair to say. And of course, Bill has had a long-standing association with Birdwatch as well over the years. He appeared in only the second issue of the magazine, actually, back in 1992 when he reviewed birds of Fair Isle. And then it was the following summer, 1993, that he began writing a regular column in the magazine as well, which I think he did for at least 5 years or so. And he made a number of subsequent appearances in the magazine, including to guest edit the February 2014 issue, which featured a wonderful look back at his birding life, in which he picked out 10 fond memories from around the world, including a day in spring in Central Park in New York looking at bright-coloured warblers, a day at Flamborough Head in autumn, which features loads of really exciting cybes, and a spring fall on Fair Isle as well also features. But yeah, we've republished that article on BirdGuides for all to read, so that's there for you to digest at your will. But yeah, really nice read, worth having a look back at. But on a personal level, I'd say it was quite nice and touching to be able to speak to Bill directly in my early years as editor of the magazine. Most recently, Bill wrote several columns for the mag that ran until early 2023. And it was an honour to have been in touch with him at those times. I found it slightly surreal, really, that the guy who had undoubtedly inspired my birding journey as a kid, and then I'd met as a child at the British Bird Watching Fair, as it was known then, was now ringing me up on my personal phone and talking about his columns and all things birding. It's all a bit surreal, really. It was one of your icons there just dialing you up. It was mad.
That must have been bizarre. Yeah.
It was.
And his last column was about meeting Peter Scott, I remember, wasn't it? Was that April 2023, I think?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Eccentric slightly. There's no one else like him. A legend, and he will be greatly missed.
Absolutely. I'll be digging the Little Black Bird book out before long. Have another read of that.
Yeah, I know. It's a few years since I've read that, but I'll have to dig it out again, I think.
Definitely.
So in today's episode, we're going to have a look at some of the recent birding stories that have been cropping up. Some good news and some bad. We're going to start with a look at Dotterel, of which was the focus of a major paper which came out earlier this month, talking about the status of it as a Scottish breeding bird. And pretty shocking statistics, really. It looks like the numbers are down pretty much 90% in recent decades. And yeah, pretty harrowing statistic and what looks like a pretty bleak future for this really charming wader. David, we had a feature in the magazine in more detail about this. Do you want to give some of your thoughts?
Yeah, Leah Kelly wrote a wonderful summary of the findings for the July issue of Birdwatch. And as you say, it's a really concerning read. So it was the results of the 4th National Montane Bird Survey. That it also looked at snow bunting and ptarmigan, but really headlines with Dotterel, because that's the worrying news to come out of it. Yet again, the second time in a row, as with the previous survey in 2011, no breeding birds found in England, Wales, or even southern Scotland. So it really feels like they're gone from those areas. And it's looking like it's getting pretty bad, even in the sort of former strongholds. It doesn't really feel right calling them strongholds anymore, of like the Eastern Highlands and northern Scotland. where they only actually found the species at 22 out of 217 sites, estimating about 112 males. And back in the
that's
1980s, back in the 1980s, there were nearly 1,981 males estimated.
Wow.
Yeah, not good.
And what's being cited as potential factors in this decline? The obvious one jumping out is climate change, of course.
Yeah, it feels like that's the main thing here. Fewer crane flies are around. They really rely on crane flies in the breeding season, the larvae of a particular species that you get in the hills. And people are saying that they're not really seeing the adults of these crane flies flying around as much. So it seems like their food source is depleted. And on the wintering grounds, declining rainfall in North Africa, that's not going to help them. That's not going to help over winter survival. And meanwhile, you've got more and more people up there bagging Monroes, often with their dogs, often off a lead, grazing, not always compatible with the interests of birds like Dotterel going on in large areas too. So obviously you can reduce the effects of those things. There's certain things you can do to sort of take the edge off it with disturbance and grazing. But when climate change is obviously pushing them back, as it is even in Europe, I think the population in Scandinavia is fairly stable, but they're being seen to move upslope and further north already there too. Yeah, it feels like it's maybe just delaying the inevitable, to be honest. It feels like it could be the first climate change driven extinction in Britain.
Yeah, pretty harrowing really, and that's part of the problem, isn't it? Warming temperatures mean warming temperatures higher up the hills as well, not just at ground level, and therein lies the problem in part. Once the Dotterels get to a point where there's nowhere left to go in Britain, as seems to be becoming the case, that worryingly seems to be spelling the end of this species as a breeding bird in Britain. Have you ever seen Dotterel on breeding grounds in Scotland?
No, I was going to ask you if you had.
Yeah, I have. Yeah, about 20 years ago, I think it was either 2005 or 2006 off the top of my head. I remember going up Campbell and seeing a male with 2 fluffy chicks in early July.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Yeah, and at the time, don't get me wrong, it was absolutely stunning to see. So exciting to see these lovely birds on their breeding grounds. Dotterel is one of my favourite waders, as I'm sure it probably is for a lot of people. We know you've got history with the species, Dave. But yeah, I just think at the time, it felt kind of part of the furniture, really. You'd semi-expected to go up Cairngorm in summer and have a chance of seeing Dotterel, and of course now that's not the case.
Yeah. So how close were they to the path? Were you like scoping them miles away, or did you just kind of blunder upon them?
Yeah, we just chanced upon them, really. It wasn't too far from the cafe at the top of the ski lift. Yeah, really quite close by. We were just walking around looking for ptarmigan, as you do. And yeah, just found this male with two fluffy chicks.
Oh, you might never see that again. I might never see that now. It's amazing.
It's crazy to think, isn't it?
Yeah. How about on Passage? How about at Trosley, places like that? Have you seen them there?
I was going to say that was what I was going to get onto, really. We as birders further south can see what's happening, really, in terms of the numbers that we're seeing on Passage. I think that's the distinctive thing from my perspective. I rarely get to Scotland in the summer, so it's not something I see firsthand, but what I can relate to is the decline of northbound passage birds in late April and May. I think about it used to be a pretty much an annual bird round here. There were regular tripping sites both east of Peterborough and actually even closer to where I live near Deeping. They'd be there most years, but it's been assigned to the history books, really, over recent years.
Yeah, well, there used to be pubs. Well, I suppose there are now pubs that are named after them from back in the day when they were, as you say, just part of the landscape in spring and hunted even. They were quite a commonly hunted bird, weren't they, on migration, which shows they must have been so much commoner. But I don't think they've even been at Chosley Drying Barns, which was always like the most famous stop-off point in my mind for them since 2023.
That's amazing in itself. As you say, there were some really big flocks there, and that doesn't even seem like too long ago, does it really? Further back than that, I think about sites when I was growing up and really keen on twitching and whatnot, and places such as Tetney Marshes in Lincolnshire would often get them, various places in the Cambridgeshire Fens, Pendle Hill in Lancashire, that's another place that always would have Dotterel in late April and early May every year without fail, and it doesn't seem to get them anymore.
Yeah, I don't remember that coming up recently.
No, and I think there have been local issues there, such as increased disturbance, which is similar to what you mentioned on breeding grounds. But nonetheless, you'd expect birds to be turning up there even if briefly, and it doesn't seem to be the case. And yeah, this kind of overall drying up of records on passage really does indicate, doesn't it, that something's not right there. And yeah, the numbers of dotterel being reported on BirdGuides have plummeted over the last 10 to 15 years. It was actually on BirdGuides. I checked this back before the pod. It was the 1st of January 2022 when we upgraded dotterel to scarce on the BirdGuides sighting service. Previous to that, it had been on there as local, which is a status afforded to birds like long-tailed duck and wood sandpiper, which seems scarcely believable now.
Yeah, I always think scarce is like the level where you would cross multiple counties to go and see that bird because it's suitably rare, and dotterel firmly is in that bracket, isn't it now?
It is, yeah, it is. And even in autumn as well, you get the odd record, wouldn't you, of birds roosting on beaches, often very incredibly tame juveniles in little groups at coastal locations, and those sort of records seem to have dried up as well.
It's just sad to be losing. It's such a unique bird, not only the landscape it lives in up in the uplands, but also so-called role reversal. A term maybe, derived from our human-centric ideas of what nature is, but, where the males take principal responsibility for incubation and chick rearing, and the females being the bright, colourful one for a change.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so it's just sorry to think that we might not be seeing so many.
So I think dotterel's a really interesting one from a kind of birder's perspective on migration. And I think it's one of these species that easily kind of slips into a negative feedback cycle. And by that, I mean, we know that they're becoming less reliable on their spring staging grounds, traditional tripping grounds, whether that be the Cambridgeshire Fens or the East Coast or wherever it might be, a Lancashire Hill, for example. But the thing is, if they're becoming less reliable, there's less people going to go and make the effort to go and look for them. Often looking for dotterel involves quite a lot of effort. Around me, it's looking in brown fields. In the spring, there can be hundreds of brown fields to look through. And if you think that the chance of finding a dotterel is something like 1% or even less than that, as opposed to, say, 10, 20%, as it might have been a few decades ago, you're less inclined to spend the time doing it. And the same goes for hiking up a hill in North Yorkshire or Lancashire. If it's less likely there's going to be birds there, you're perhaps not going to push yourself to do it. And therefore, as a result, I think potentially, even though they clearly are becoming less and less regular, without doubt, I do think there is an element that they're probably getting missed as well because people just aren't looking for them in some places.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, there's not too much overlap with other species in terms of the time and the habitat, into other things that people would be looking for where dotterel are going to turn up. So, people probably aren't going to Choseley drying barns in May like they used to, because, as you say, there's been a bit of a gap in the number of dotterel sightings, and it's going to become a bit of a self-fulfilling thing, isn't it, in the end?
Yeah, totally. And I think from my perspective around here, we always knew that they would be in a couple of selections of fields in various places on the fens, and it was like you just find the brown fields in those areas, and somewhere between about the 20th of April and the 15th of May there'll be some dotterel there, probably for a few days, but that just doesn't happen anymore. So you're back to square one, and if the birds aren't using these traditional tripping grounds, and they could therefore just be anywhere, the scale of the challenge becomes all the more difficult.
Yeah. So was it pea fields, your local ones, when they turned up before? Because that was always what they liked, wasn't it? Pea fields.
Yeah, pea fields, also just any brown fields really, often pea fields, and they often seem to like the blacker soil, kind of like the more peaty soil. So most of the traditional spots around here have been on that darker soil rather than the kind of paler sandy stuff. Again, what that means, I don't know. It's perhaps something to do with feeding opportunities, I guess.
Yeah, I wonder if they're looking out for that while they're flying over, seeing that dark colour and thinking, right, that looks good, let's drop in.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there was that flock in Cambridgeshire this spring, wasn't there, near, I think it was Gamlingay, and there was a trip of birds there for about a couple of weeks on and off, I think, and that, as far as I know, at least not in recent years, has not been a sight for them. It was just by chance that Mark Thomas of the RSPB bumped into them. And how often is that kind of situation playing out across the country where birds are stopping off in random locations and birders just aren't looking? So yeah, Food for thought, anyway.
Yeah, it would have been really interesting, if the sort of knock-mig revolution came along, sort of, say, 15 years earlier, maybe before the sort of latest part of the decline curve. And if we could compare that data to today, see if nocturnal migrants had dropped off. Obviously, it wasn't really in vogue back then, but it just occurred to me that would have been an interesting comparison.
Yeah, for sure. I do think there's probably mileage in them actually being easier in the autumn these days. Certainly around me, anyway. We have lots of golden plover flocks in October, November, and you do get the occasional dotterel in with them. It's gone from being that kind of iconic bird of spring that you'd go out and look for to being more of a mid to late autumn bird around here. So again, that's something to think about.
Yeah, and not unknown among winter flocks of European golden plover.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, there have been one or two that have wintered in my area.
Yeah, so they're on the UK red list quite firmly now. Internationally, least concern, but the regional IUCN red lists, they are on that for the UK too. So yeah, it's not looking good.
No, it's a really interesting species, though, as we've touched on, both in terms of the role reversal when it comes to raising the young, but also in terms of their kind of migratory connectivity and where these birds actually breed.
Yeah, because I think both males and females have been known and shown in the same breeding season to move between Britain and Scandinavia, I think Norway specifically. So yeah, like a female will mate with a male in Scotland, leave him to deal with the young, and then fly across the North Sea and find some new fella.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Dotterel, a clear loser of climate change. Of that there is no doubt. And the British population now in a rather bleak situation. We're going to take a short break, but after we'll be back and we'll be talking about some of the winners of recent climate change. Welcome back to the BirdGuides Podcast. In the second part of today's pod, we'll be looking at some of the other key news stories that have been emerging over recent weeks. And one of these was the Heathland Bird Survey results. That's the survey that took place last year, 2025. And in particular, it focused on 3 species that are doing really rather well.
Nice to have some happier news.
Yeah, absolutely. And the 3 species in question are woodlark, Dartford warbler, and European nightjar. And all 3 species have shown increases in their numbers. Woodlark, it's 29%. Nightjar is 20%. And Dartford warbler, 27%. So all across the board, some good news for these species, which have at times been looking really rather precarious in their status and plight in the UK.
Yeah. Have you been seeing more of those species near you?
Not really myself, because I don't really have any heathland habitat, to be honest. They're not really birds that are on my radar. Every year we have had records of all 3, but they're all very much, as it stands anyway, they're all very much vagrants to our areas. But you probably got a few more heaths your way, Dave.
Yeah, I certainly did when I was in West Sussex. I could easily nip up the road and see those 3 species. I'm a bit further away. I'm about an hour's drive from that kind of habitat here, but a nice run up the road to Ashdown Forest. You can fill your boots with Dartford warblers, woodlarks, nightjars. They're all fairly tough birds. Well, apart from Dartford warbler, the woodlark and nightjar are quite tough birds in my sort of local listing area of Hastings and Rother, because we don't have any heaths in that district either. But we do have breeding Dartford warblers on some of the cliff tops around here, and that just feels like a bit of happy overspill from that really burgeoning and thriving really Heathland population further inland. So yeah, really good to see. And they're all just quality birds, aren't they? They're all really good vocalizations, really charismatic animals.
Yeah, definitely. My kind of experience with all 3 really is when I go on holiday to Norfolk, to be honest, in the summer or in the spring, and whether it's singing woodlarks or going at dusk to listen to chirring nightjars or just listening to Dartford warblers scratching away on a warm sunny morning, it feels like a bird associated with holidays for me. So I'm not lucky to have them on my doorstep. But yeah, we do get the odd 1 or 2 in our area. For example, we did have a woodlark this winter, which spent the winter in a skylark flock on the outskirts of Peterborough.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so maybe that is an indication that these things are on the up and we should be looking out for them a bit more. But
Yeah.
I think one of the things about the census is we're not just the increase in the numbers, but also the growth in distribution of each of them. For example, we're now seeing, aren't we, that nightjars are being found more and more in Scotland, for example.
Yeah, and there's a Dartford warbler in, is it North Yorkshire at the moment?
Yeah, just north of Newark.
Yeah.
just north of York.
Yeah, which is really quite an outlier. And yeah, but fast forward, I don't know, 5-10 years, maybe they could be breeding. It's probably a bit of a stretch, but they could certainly be breeding closer to that kind of a part of Britain.
Yeah, it feels like it's going to just depend on winter weather, doesn't it? Really, that seems to be the key. That seems to be the key takeaway. I did, back in my university days, I did a study on Dartford warblers for my dissertation, which
Right,
was
didn't know that.
doing species climate modelling on Dartford warbler and projecting potential range into the future. That's going back 15 or so years now.
So what did your crystal ball tell you there?
Pretty much what we're seeing, really, that it was going to be a case of, bar any kind of extreme weather, we're going to see a gradual increase further north in the species. But yeah, we have obviously had a couple of cold winters since then that have set them back a bit. I know that Dartford warbler is one of those species, isn't it, that seems to make advances and then get knocked back periodically.
Yeah, because they were knocked back after the winter of 62-63. They're actually down to 11 pairs in Britain. So, like, on the verge of national extinction. But when you've got 4,100 territories, which is the estimate from the latest survey, there's surely a much lower risk, especially when those harsh winters are so much less frequent now.
I think that's the thing, isn't it? How often do we get extended freeze-ups these days? Very scarcely, if at all. It just feels like a very unusual event now for any sort of cold weather, doesn't it? It feels like round here, it's so rare to see the lakes freezing up these days. And if they do, it's not for very long.
Yeah, so I think they're pretty safe for the time being, aren't they? But yeah, it's brilliant to see them. But it's easy to forget that heathland habitat wasn't always there for these birds when traditional management, all the sort of common land and grazing practices kind of fizzled out in the 17th, 18th centuries. Heathland became much more fragmented. Forestry didn't help going forward from there, and these birds just weren't left with the places to live.
Yeah, indeed, although it does seem that active forestry is particularly useful for nightjar. It's kind of
Oh, sorry, my dog's just barking at the postman.
We've got an intruder.
Yeah, don't worry, she'll pipe down. Yeah.
Yeah, no, as I was saying, I think it's, in the case of nightjar, for example, it's quite an intermittent bird in the Midlands, in part because of habitat availability, but where they do seem to crop up is at these kind of forestry plantations where for a few years perhaps there's some suitable habitat and they might move in for a little while and then disappear again. For that reason, it's not a bird I've seen in my local area. Although annoyingly there was one suppressed in 2024, which was there for a few days just in a kind of area of rough ground, not any heathland or anything like that. I guess it was just a post-breeding bird at the end of the season. But yeah, it's a bird that I feel like maybe with a bit of luck, one summer I might get one churring in one of the local forestry plantations in the sort of west of my area.
Yeah, I know a couple of sites that you certainly wouldn't describe as heathland in Kent and Sussex, where the foresters have gone in, cleared a whole area, and nightjars, like you say, have moved in for a short while. You have to make the most of it while they are there, because they're just on the lookout for that quite transient successional habitat. And once it becomes closed up enough, they just move on.
Yeah, Dartford warbler is a little bit of a trickier one for me. Nightjar tricky enough, but Dartford warbler could be anywhere. That's the thing. We obviously don't have any suitable breeding habitat around here, but it's one of those birds that at some point you're just going to look out on one in winter, perhaps following a pair of stone chats around in some rough ground or something like that.
Yeah, they do like to move to the sort of lower and more coastal areas in winter, don't they? Even though the winters aren't as harsh as they used to be, they still seem to prefer that security of that slightly warmer temperature.
Yeah, it can be quite unforgiving on the fens in winter, that's for sure. Although there have been a couple of records, both in the Nîmes Washes area over the years. So yeah, I live in hope.
Yeah, but one little figure I dug out while I was reading up on these is that people reckon that there's going to be more than 60% of the Dartford warbler's range in Europe as a whole is predicted to be unsuitable later this century. So,
Wow.
yeah, not all a rosy picture, and that shows that it's actually a really good thing that we are able to host so many of them here now. This really growing population, that might be a really good and important part of the world population of Dartford warbler going forward. If I guess because of aridification and maybe more wildfires in southern Europe, it's just not going to fit them so well.
Yeah, it's certainly silver linings and all that, isn't it? That's the thing. One of the things that I remember concluding in my dissertation was just how much available habitat there is in Britain, should the climate allow them to be here. You think about all the upland heathland that's there that could potentially be colonised should it prove to become a bit more habitable for Dartford warblers in the future. So, yeah, it'd be interesting to see what happens, although I say interesting, it's slightly disconcerting that the reasons underlining why these birds are moving, of course.
Yeah, although I think you can attribute it in quite a large part to the positive thing of habitat management by, the likes of the RSPB, the Wildlife Trusts, creating the optimal habitat for these birds. I think that is a big thing to thank for these positive trends.
Yeah, totally. I think that's absolutely fair to point out. But yeah, another kind of heathland bird in some areas, of course, is common redstart. And while that's not really a climate change related species in terms of its range and whatnot, it has cropped up on the BirdGuides website in the last couple of weeks following a fascinating discovery in South Wales.
Yeah, Dante Shepherd found a hybrid while he was on a family walk in a quarry in South Wales. Yeah, which is really an extraordinary find.
Yep, so this is a hybrid common times black redstart. Very unusual find in Britain. Only a handful of occurrences ever documented. And in fact, this is only the second individual ever to have been photographed in Britain, following the first, which wasn't all that long ago, actually. The first was only in March 2025. It turned up in southern Cornwall during an influx of black redstarts, a classic early spring movement of that species, and a male hybrid was photographed down there on the Lizard. But yeah, a very rare bird in Britain. But we do know that hybrids can and do occur regularly on the continent, or reasonably regularly, I should say. And it's interesting that the reason that is speculated for this is human intervention, really. It's bringing the two species together.
Yeah, like you say, it's a more common hybrid in northern and central Europe. But yeah, this situation where you've got a quarry, that rocky terrain that's more black redstart turf, right on the edge of prime woodland, like mature woodland for common redstart, just brings these species into a meeting point that just wouldn't have happened before.
Yeah, I think it sounds like this site that Dante had the bird at is a kind of established or semi-established black redstart breeding site, or has been in the past. And of course then has common redstarts breeding in the adjacent forest. So it brings these two species close together and creates the conditions. And of course, while there's nothing to absolutely prove that this bird was born there, the fact that it turned up in spring territory for several days suggests that it perhaps knew the area rather than it being some really random coincidence.
Yeah. Did you listen to the recordings of it? It had a really interesting song.
Yeah, it did. It was quite curious, wasn't it?
Yeah, I thought to my ear, it actually sounded more like a common than a black redstart, I have to say. I think if I'd been walking the area and not been analysing it too hard, I might have just dismissed it as a common redstart. It sort of had that almost chaffinch-like opening and that kind of thoughtful trailing flourish at the end, and I picked out quite a lot of mimicry in that as well. So that I've quite enjoyed listening to the recording and trying to identify what species it seemed to be impersonating.
Yeah, it's well worth having a look at the article, which is on the BirdGuides website. It was published back on the 22nd of July. And Dante's done a really nice write-up on the bird, the circumstances of the discovery, his initial impressions of the bird, both in terms of plumage, looks and vocalizations, as David says. And then also just talks through in detail the identification of the bird and what led him to believe it was a hybrid after all. As we've said, a really unusual and interesting bird, certainly in a British perspective.
Yeah, it was top field work, I think, there, and well worth listening to recordings. It does, I say it sounds more like a common redstart, but it does throw in that wonderful crackling sound of black redstart now and then. And yeah, it's throwing in like tree pipit, song thrush, meadow pipit, great tit, chaffinch calls. Yeah, just love. You can get a lot out of listening to a redstart.
Yeah, both species I don't really hear enough of, to be honest. Where I am in the lowland eastern England, we just don't get them. We get common redstarts on passage in spring and more often autumn. In fact, I had my first of the autumn just a couple of days ago over the weekend. But
Nice.
yeah, black redstart is a real rarity for me around here. They have a history of breeding sporadically in Peterborough, but yeah, they're just not species I see enough of, sadly.
Yeah, I think they must be under-recorded as a breeding bird. You know, I've been in areas where they are breeding, and unless you're walking around usually a town, usually a very urban area, unless you're getting up at 3-4 in the morning to hear that song, they're just going to be very high on the rooftops and dropping in and out of people's gardens, and just not very conspicuous for the rest of the day.
Yeah, I made the mistake of going into Peterborough at 4:30 in the morning on a Sunday morning recently, which it was quiet. I was anticipating it to be quiet, but there were a few interesting sights and sounds, shall we say, as I was wandering around the city centre hoping to hear black redstarts. Failed on black redstarts, but there were some late night revellers still out and about enjoying themselves, let's put it that way.
Yeah, some cultural content.
Yeah, quite indeed. From that cultural content, let's move on. Have you seen the news about Bearded Vulture in the Netherlands, Dave?
Yes, if you're a keen Dutch lister, it's now fair game. You can tick it.
I thought that was really interesting. And yeah, in the context of the British records that we've had over the last decade, some really fascinating news and a really interesting revelation. Essentially, what's happened is that the Dutch Rarities Committee has said that it will accept all known wild-born or wild-hatched birds, I should say, from the alpine population as wild, and they will be accepted as naturally occurring. In other words, and this is obviously the most important thing for birders in many cases, they're now tickable. So yeah, an extensive review was conducted by some Dutch ornithologists, one of which was Hans Polman, who is a name that many birders might recognise. He was heavily involved in determining the origins and the story of the famous 2020 British bird that occurred between May and, was it October?
Yeah, when it left at Beachy Head, it flew out to sea there.
Did you see it there?
No, I was on my way back from City when that was going on.
Ouch. Did you see it at all?
Yeah, I got it I think it's at that place wonderfully called Cutthroat Bridge.
Oh yeah, up in the Peak District.
Yeah, I didn't fancy the big hike it sounded like there was a pretty treacherous hole that half of Britain's birders fell into. Yeah, so I didn't fancy that. So when it came through that you could just see it from a lay-by, I thought, yeah, let's get a bit of that.
Sounds nice and easy.
Yeah. It would have been nice to have seen it in Sussex, though.
Yeah, it was quite surreal. It actually turned up in the Peterborough area. Did you know that?
Oh, it's just on a road, wasn't it? Or just blocking traffic?
Yeah, have you seen that legendary photo of it just sitting in the middle of the road with cars like queuing up either side
amazing.
of it?
Yeah.
Absolutely amazing. But yeah, to see that knocking about in the fens was something that I don't think I'll see again. I was actually in Ireland for most of its stay there. I think it was around a few days in the fens. And yeah, I was actually on my way back from Ireland and caught up with the bird on my last morning. Oh, sorry, its last morning when I got back. And yeah, just absolutely mad, just driving down this fenland road and flat landscape for miles around, and then just literally flying straight over my car, this massive bearded vulture.
Wow.
It was just a sight that will totally surreal and will probably never happen again. But amazing bird. By this new Dutch criteria, that bird would be tickable.
Yeah.
So that was a wild-born bird, wasn't it?
So are they backdating it like that? Are they saying, 5 years ago, if you saw one, it counts?
That I don't know, but it does beg questions about what the BOU might do about them.
Yeah. I wonder if it won't be quite such a expeditious decision, but it might be down the line.
No, of course, at the moment, birds like that sit on Category E, which feels like a bit of a disservice to me to a degree.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like if you're the only other alternative, you've got two choices, really, haven't you? You're either looking at a population like that of a bird that's been reintroduced and thinking it's looking like it's going in the right direction, they're breeding in the wild, looks like a success, let's enjoy them, let's count them on a list. Or you say we're going to wait, I don't know, what would it be, 10, 20, could be 30 years before you've really got a firmly long-term established population of multiple generations.
Well, this is the thing with long-lived birds like that, isn't it?
Yeah.
It takes ages.
And that's just certainly not compatible with the game, so to speak, of birding, of listing. It's not going to work. So I definitely favour this approach of, if it looks like it's going in the right direction, rubber stamp it, and then, if it turns out it was just a blip and they fizzle out and the population doesn't do well, then you can always revise that at a later date.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's something that needs looking at, and while it perhaps doesn't need major changes to how we treat these birds, it feels a bit of a disservice lumping them in with things that have genuinely escaped from captivity.
Yeah, and it's similar. I wonder if it might somehow set a precedent for the white-tailed eagles in England as well. Obviously we can go up to Scotland and see longer established populations of reintroduced white-tailed eagles up there, but we're having a similar situation of the birds that we're seeing roaming around here in Sussex that, I know have roamed towards your way too, and people have seen them from Cornwall up to northern England. And that population, do you wait, say, decades, or shall we just say, look, that they're breeding now? Let's call them Category C and put them on our list as well.
Well, exactly. Perhaps it's a case of wild-born birds, as the Dutch have done. It's just treating the wild-born birds as the ones that are tickable, rather than the introduced individuals. I was actually just looking at this story back from 2020 about the bearded vulture that toured the UK that year, and its parents. So bear in mind this was 2020, but the parents of that bird released in 1988 and 1989. So gives you a sense of the scale that we're dealing with here. And of course, it's going to be similar-ish with white-tailed eagles, isn't it? How many of the birds up in Scotland are direct releases from Norway? Certainly, if you go to Ireland now and you're lucky enough to see a white-tailed eagle there, as I have been on one or two occasions, and you're wondering, are these birds that have been introduced from Norway 10, 15 years ago, however long it might be?
Yeah. And isn't that how they play it in the States with California condor, that they basically said, yeah, we could be waiting forever. Some birders might have died by the time we can really prove that these things are bedded in again. So let's just let everyone enjoy them and count them.
I think that's a reasonable position to take, to be honest.
Yeah, I think that's how they played it out there. So I definitely favour that approach. I think it's sensible. It doesn't need to be, listing doesn't need to be tied into decades-long population dynamic studies necessarily.
Yeah, absolutely. And ultimately, though, the underlying thing here is that bearded vulture is doing well in Europe again, which is great. It's been a long time since the species has been proliferating like this, and this increase in extralimital records that we're seeing now, including the two British records, but they seem to be almost annual, really, on the near continent now. It seems like most years the Dutch or the Germans or even the Danes are getting these birds. We just have to remember that's a reflection of the species' success in the Alps, and that's something to be celebrated.
Yeah. I mean, wasn't it amazing seeing that picture of that one in the Arctic tussling with a white-tailed eagle?
Oh,
what a
God,
picture.
Amazing. If you haven't seen it, it is on the BirdGuides website, listener. Really extraordinary series of photographs from the island of Rust in northern Norway, I think, isn't it? Where it's tussling with one of the local white-tailed eagles. Absolutely bonkers.
Yeah, bird photo of all time for me. That's just one of the top ones I've ever seen. Just the way they're looking at each other, and the posture and the background is just perfect, pin sharp as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So it might not be too long until we're seeing another bearded vulture over here in Britain. And to be honest, you thought this summer, the way it's been with so much high pressure and hot weather, it might have been the year for it to happen, but it hasn't yet, at least. But there have been some really good rarities around in the last week or so. Of course, on our last pod, we talked about some legendary July rarities. And before that, we were talking about some of the latest highlights being seen across Britain. But a lot's happened since then, hasn't it, Dave? Long-tailed Shrike, no?
Yeah.
One of them.
Who would have thought that? I mean, when Ian missed, he didn't quite get up there in time for the bird in Fife. And I said, well, you know how these things are. It's not necessarily going to be decades until the next one. You might be surprised how fast it comes around again. I didn't expect it to be almost the next day that one was found again, in a very accessible location.
Yeah, and just a little bit more context on this. So it does appear to be a different bird. So the news broke on the 18th, I think it was, on BirdGuides. It was put out on the morning of the 18th that this bird had been found on the Gloucestershire-Oxfordshire border, but it transpired that it had been found on approximately the 8th of July, which was the final day of the Fife Birds presence. That was the day that David and I were up there seeing it with David's dog Nevis. But it's since transpired that it had been found, this bird in Gloucestershire was found on the 9th. So the day after the fife bird disappeared. So an extraordinary coincidence whereby you have this fife bird disappearing, then the next day one turning up in Gloucestershire. The automatic assumption would be, surely that's the same bird relocating. But it does seem, looking at the photos and analysing the two birds' plumage, that they're different.
Yeah, and of course the next thought is this too good to be true? Could this be, some kind of escape event? Or because people have been breeding, not many people, but it has been bred in captivity in recent years in Britain. So that's an inevitable question. Personally, I think, the forces that led to one arriving in Britain could easily lead to two, and probably in a lot of cases of these extreme vagrants, there may well be another one out there. It may not have been the one individual that has made it across continents, and it's just that, luck usually means that, probability usually means that only one is found. But in this case, the second one has. And if you're keeping long-tailed shrikes, it's going to be a pretty valuable bird. You wouldn't think you'd just easily let them go.
No, quite. Ultimately, this bird remains on site, and I think this one is doing what we expected the fife bird to do, really, and that's just sit around and molt. A lot of the photos from the last few days show it to be in really heavy molt, so I can't envisage this bird's going to be going anywhere anytime soon. So yeah, it could be around for a few weeks to come yet.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, all for it. More and more people can enjoy that species in Britain now.
Yeah, huge twitch there on the first couple of days, wasn't there, by the looks of things, and unsurprisingly, given the location. Nice and easy to get to.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's been some other stuff going on. There was a pale morph Eleonora's falcon seen flying in off the sea at North Foreland on the 24th. There's been quite a few night herons turning up, including a flock of 4 in North Yorkshire. North Ronaldsay scored a Barolo shearwater or a Barolo type the other day. So, yeah, there's been quite a lot going on.
Yeah, it seems like there's a few night herons about. Whether that's a legacy of this lasting hot and dry summer, I'm not sure, but it feels like if you're a patch birder pretty much anywhere in the UK at the moment, night heron is surely in play. It's probably going to be a case of getting out very early or very late and trying some of your local heron hotspots, whether that's a colony or just a favoured feeding spot. For example, around me at the moment at Baston Fen, there's a few of the scrapes there are just drying out, so they're absolutely full of little egrets at the moment. I had up to 60 little egrets there the other day, and yeah, you're just thinking it would be so nice for a night heron to be here. I keep going back and checking, but it's going to be dry in a few days, so that opportunity may pass. But yeah, definitely one to be on the lookout for. And as I alluded to earlier, there was a bit of weather over the weekend, wasn't there? After such a hot and dry July so far, there was a bit of a westerly kicked in, and there was a little bit of rain in western areas, and finally we saw a bit of sea watching action with Bridges of Ross picking up, didn't it? It had some good tallies over the weekend. Saturday produced 28 Wilson Storm petrels, which I think is the second highest ever land-based total in Ireland.
Yeah.
And there were several hundred cories and a few hundred greats, I think. So yeah, it feels like the birds are clearly out there. It's just going to be a case of waiting for the westerlies to properly kick in, which surely at some point they're going to, although it looks like it's going to be another hot week ahead.
Oh, another one. Gosh. Yeah. Well, we'll look forward to that weather coming. I think Wales had its record count of Wilson's Storm Petrel as well, didn't it, with 9 this week. So, yeah, it's all to play for.
It's amazing, really. Yeah, so we'll see. And just a shout out, actually, to Belvide Reservoir. That place constantly amazes me and frustrates me as an inland Midlands patcher, just how many good birds it gets. You see it had a white rump sandpiper over the weekend following a stone curlew last week. But yeah, I saw something from Steve Nuttall on social media saying that's the 10th white rump sandpiper that he's seen at Belvide Reservoir.
Does that include that big flock?
Yeah, it does, to be fair. So he had that flock of 8 last autumn, but then he also had an adult, I think it was August 2022, he said. So that's 10 in the space of, 4 years or something. For a water body right in the middle of the Midlands, that's pretty impressive going. And yeah. Him and his cohorts seem to dig out some cracking stuff there repeatedly. And he wrote a really good article about Belvide in Birdwatch a couple of years ago. I think it was the May 2024 issue. It's well worth having a read of that.
Absolutely. Yeah, they do call it the Golden Pond for a reason.
Yeah, plenty of golden rarities there over the years. Okay, that's all we've got time for in today's episode of the BirdGuides Podcast. We'll be back next week with episode 5, when we'll be looking at the joys of patch birding in August, arguably the best birding month of the calendar, one that I'm certainly very excited about. In the meantime, you can keep up with everything BirdGuides related at birdguides.com, where you'll find the latest news, sightings, and everything else that we do. All the stories that we talked about in today's pod can be found as part of the Bird Guides newsletter, which you can sign up for free at birdguides.com/newsletter. But in the meantime, say bye for now, and we'll see you next week.
See ya.
You have been listening to the BirdGuides Podcast. For the latest and best birding content, visit birdguides.com.